Good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Nom.
Good morning, Mark. Nom. Nom nom.
Nom
It's
nom nom.
it's Moped Outlaws putting to a podcast near you.
Yeah, right next to you, in fact.
Mm. In fact, we're in your ears.
We're in your mother's cupboard. It's fall. It's fall, my friend.
It is.
You guys getting a little spooky around the house?
I dreamt that the apocalypse happened last night. There were nuclear bombs going off, and it's like,
That's
what
no
the?
dream. That was 7 o'clock news.
So that's pretty spooky.
Wow, did you wake up?
Well, I'm here, aren't I?
I don't know. Are you?
No, yeah. I mean, it. I didn't like wake up and startled in the middle and get to escape it. I actually got to run around and witness the chaos for a little while.
Wow.
Um, I was checking in with myself about why my subconscious was going there and what was it that was happening. And yeah, it's been an introspective morning.
What did you arrive at in that realm?
I went to a funeral yesterday. Well, it was a celebration of life, but it had been, delayed for months because of the all the different factors, including vaccination, COVID, etc. And it was, well, I'll just say it. The funeral was for a guy named Grant Imahara, and Grant was, among other things, someone who rebuilt R2D2 for the prequels. He's an electrical engineer, but he also went on to become one of the main talents on a show called Mythbusters. And I knew Grant from when he was first an intern and then an employee at THX
He
Home
the guy
TV
with the
Show.
goatee and the glasses?
No, this is the Japanese American electrical engineer person.
Okay.
And anyway, so because a lot of Lucasfilm employees knew Grant, that we had a special event at the building that used to be ILM. ILM's not there anymore. It's like the world has changed. And so we were there and we watched these very moving things being shared by people who remembered him and videos that were made for him, and his family was there, and we got to see people we hadn't seen. Like for me, it's been like 6 7 years since I saw most of these people. And so it was really this rich emotional landscape. And it was on a big soundstage, and there were, we were treated, there was this beauty to it. And then, there was like Japanese whiskey that was like aged in a barrel 15 years that we could have. There was any, these incredible, like, but very, they were very good tasting, but not opulent. Like it wasn't a bunch of lobster and craziness on the food. There was veggies and some good cheeses and, stuff like that. But because it wasn't a church and a grave site, I don't think people let go emotionally. Like there was a little bit of crying during the various shares, but generally speaking, it was very much, you know, kept to kind of a social event.
So, I'm
You
just
care
thinking
to
of
share
Norm
with us what
Macdonald.
you find humorous about a
I'm,
funeral?
I'm just thinking of Norm Macdonald's in an interview. There's this famous clip going around where he's all, I hear a lot of people talking about celebration of life when someone dies and to be happy. And when I die, fuck that, man. I'm dead. You be sad.
Right. Well, that's a great point of view. And anyway, so I think it was so moving to remember the time I spent with Grant and to remember what he meant to me, and then to hear everybody else's point of view. And then afterwards, to be able to have a little bit of food and drink and reconnect with each other I mean, I haven't been at a social event where I've hugged people for a long, long time. And to be hugging these people who I was involved with some of the most potent, productive parts of my life when I was with Lucasfilm. And I really deeply miss it. Like I dream about it often.
Hmm.
And so the other thing that was coming up for me was that uh, I went to perform Saturday night. I got invited to perform and play music for a small party in Santa Rosa. And as I was getting dressed to go party, I was realizing how I'm not happy with the way my body looks. And so I was confronted with this aspect of myself. And so I I put it together, and I went and I had a blast. And I was exhausted and my body hurt, from humping gear, carrying gear, and
Is that what
um,
you call her now? You refer to her as gear?
yeah, yeah, and carrying it up the stairs and loading it in and out of the studio, blah blah blah. And so between that and the sense of loss of my old past,
That equated to the apocalypse.
well, let me finish. I had this long conversation with a woman who is now a producer who was like, "You should send me that script you were talking about," right?
Oh,
And so in one way, there was an opening.
right, right.
So we talked about production, and so the dream started that I was back at Lucasfilm, and it was the new group of people producing stuff, and I was on set, working, making things happen, and it was an outdoor set, right? We were on location somewhere, and so as the dream's progressing, we're going through various challenges, and I'm trying to find somebody, and I'm like coming out of this tent, and I'm looking up in the horizon, and like it's the giant plumes, right, of massive clouds, and I'm like,
Famous mushroom cloud.
yeah, it wasn't really the famous mushroom cloud. It was more like the mini nuke, right? But nonetheless, this was the same thing. Like we're all right, everything's changing. Life is not what it's going to be, or life isn't what it was, blah blah blah. And so when I woke up, I realized, well, I'd already resolved to and taken some steps yesterday to begin the healing path about my weight. And then so there's some grief around letting go of the habits, right? And then
Yeah,
there's unexpressed grief about the loss of my work partnerships, which became very poignant because I was right in the emotional fields of all these people that I actually love, right? It wasn't just work there.
right.
And then this small bit of loss of Grant, and I don't mean to minimize his loss. I'm not saying that. It was just like it'd be untruthful for me to claim how close I was to him and that he called me on the like that didn't happen.
Right.
But the overall picture was one. I woke up this morning and was doing my various practices, and I was like, I actually began to kind of cry when I was doing my qigong because I realized there was this grief that wanted to come out. So that's been my experience. I think it's all about releasing grief and the symbols that
And
are part
change,
of, yeah,
life
and
change,
the end of
profound
the
change.
world.
Right, right. Yeah. Um,
And then I read a new of Course in Miracles, and I was like, oh, there's this whole like thing that's being created. Like today was like about the ego. Like as long as you believe the ego, then I can't get in. But as soon as you like just say, hey, help me with the ego, then I'm available. Right. This is the voice of the book, which one could presume it is Jesus talking through the book.
oh man, I saw your post Friday. Speaking of all this kind of stuff
What post?
on Facebook,
Which
your
one?
singular. Well, I thought you only did one. I thought you're only allowed one.
Well, I just wanted to make sure because there was this other one that showed up. I got a bunch of comments on,
I
which was
don't
from
know.
a year ago.
Really?
And I was like, Facebook, what are you doing? Like, how are you showing this year-old post to people and they're commenting on it?
Well, I think what happens if someone happens to come across a post and they post, all of a sudden it's got new life. I
So
think the
someone did
algorithm,
comment on it. Someone went digging a deeply 1 year into my timeline and left me a really sweet comment,
And then
right?
everyone chimed in.
And then you're right, because it popped up on their timeline again,
Right, right.
or wherever, notifications or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
So
So yeah,
I really wanted to be my irksome self on that Facebook Friday post. And I was like, you know what? Let's just take a breath, like it said. I was like, I don't need to do that. Um, it
yeah.
just occurs to me like you really went to a wake for Grant, yeah, but you really like it sounds like this wake was really a passing of the whole Lucasfilm thing, like you never really had some kind of chapter marker experience of letting this go and that this profound aspect of your life was moving on. It sounds like that's kind of what happened for you this weekend.
I think you're right. I totally think you're right. Because it was really clear that we were all there together, and the thing that wasn't there was the work we were doing.
And just for the body thing, I'm just what helped change what I was given this advice years ago, 6 years ago, when I started working with JT and Jake Peterson. And Jake said to me, you really want to change your physical form, no sugar, no salt, no white flour. And I did that for 3 months. And fresh fruit was okay. So, when sugar, it was like really nothing with processed sugar in it,
Yeah.
including maple syrup and honey.
Wow. Because maple syrup, I understand. Honey, it's sugar, and it's processed by bees.
Yeah, but
Even the raw honey.
here's what I think it was for me, from my personal experience, was the white flour was the one that surprised me. That was super like, wow. And
It's in
salt.
everything.
Yeah, so it just changed my consciousness, my connection with those three elements. And now they're back in my life now, but they're not back the way they were. And it kind of reminds me, like I remember in my 20s, I poured buckets of salt on fries and tons of sugar in my coffee. And I just think, wow, like I really cashed a major check in my 20s for my physical well-being.
Yeah. You made a deposit at the devil's bank.
Yeah, man. Fuck. I think like, yeah, well, you were going to live to into your 90s quite healthy, but we're now you'll be lucky if you see 75.
I don't think it works that way.
I don't know. I think it does, just from my elders that I've seen pass away. In fact, one of the profound ones was Tom, Liz's stepfather.
Yeah.
I remember this great conversation I had with him where I was asking him about re-engaging with life because he was pretty much just watching TV. And he had mourned when Liz's mom passed really profoundly. That was a deep wound in his
Impacting.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he said he remembers when it came this point in his life where he could re-engage and he chose not to. And now he was living out the ramifications of that choice.
Yeah. I mean, what I was speaking to a minute ago is the idea that if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right.
There's an element of that, true.
And then there's just the reality of what your genetics are and how well you curate your health, right?
Right.
And curation of health includes celebration and joy. And my grandpa Ozzy said, moderation in all things, including moderation.
Well, part of like with Course in Miracles, what I've been really meditating on the past few days is God is joy. God is hope. So if I'm in a process that I think is spiritual and there's no joy in it, that's not spiritual. That's ego.
Right. I love that. That's a brilliant way to see it. Yeah. So that's how kind of how I started my day, and I'm starting to lift a little bit.
Wow.
I got through all my journaling and all my practices, and I'm I have a bunch of things planned for the day that are going to be productive, and I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, just getting to hug people, like I'd forgotten. So right, and oh
Yeah,
my god, yeah, and meeting new people that I hadn't met before, and getting to know them for a minute, and everyone was it was solemn in a sense, but everyone was willing to like escape just the solemnity of the event and be connected, because it was such a treasure to see everybody, right? We'd all, had it been so long, and it's such a, blessing. And I think, isolation's a real thing. Talk about health,
yeah,
that's one of the things about this whole COVID thing that's been so really damaging to people's health is the isolation piece. And I remember our recent trip to Red Whale Coffee,
yeah.
which is in Terra Linda. And if you're in Terra Linda, go to Red Whale Coffee. They're
Fuck
really
yeah.
good.
Really. They have
Um,
one in Tam Junction too.
and they have a really cool spot to hang out. Anyway, I remember hanging out with you in person, and it had been a while since we'd hung out in person and getting a hug then. I was like, yeah,
Right in the middle of the street for everyone to see.
just
They were quickly
showing them the
arrested and hauled
example of
away.
it's time, people, get over yourself.
It's so interesting because for me, uh, dystopian, is it dystopian or dystopian?
Tomato, tomato, whatever.
I don't know. My children are
What's
constantly correcting me.
Dionysus,
So
right?
it's
So
so close to me. Like I feel like we're living a 1984 scenario, not literally 1984, but that dystopian story. As an example, I finished Spike Lee's whole,
four-part series.
yeah, it's brilliant. Um, One of the things I noticed is after the insurrection, of course, they tighten up security around the White House and the Capitol. And now there's this fucking sick metal fence that's thick and hardcore with barbed wire at the top. And it's like, okay, there's another step away from our freedom. Like we're creating an environment of fear and security. And I was thinking about, I don't know if I was speaking to someone about this. So if I'm repeating myself, you can stop me. I was thinking about the shooting that just happened at a store. I think it was a Kohl's store a few days ago. And people were talking about they need metal detectors and more security. I was like, so there it is. It's instead of taking a step to how about making it really hard to get a gun? Instead, it's like, let's tighten security. So now just going into a store is an experience of fear. And, like we're just making the walls closer and closer.
Um, this brings up so many great ideas for me. One, after the events of January 6, 2021, when a bunch of really misguided people broke into the halls of the people and defamed them in an attempt to try and stop the certification of an election at the behest of a megalomaniac wannabe public servant.
Well, I don't think that's a
We
wannabe public servant. That's a wannabe starting something.
Anyway, after all that shit went down,
Yeah.
a few months later, it was obvious. Joe Biden was president. He was started working things, and early in the spring, they took all those walls down. Yeah,
So
and
that
most
fence isn't there that I saw in Spike Lee.
well, let me finish. They
Okay.
took it down because the idea is that it's the people's house,
Right.
and it shouldn't have to be this way.
Right.
And then as things started heating up again, there was another call to action by the same groups, the Proud Boys and some of these other groups, about how they were going to go and have a protest in Washington around the election results. And just in the last day or so, you're going to be the audience. You're listening to this later, but the results from the Arizona's like fourth or fifth audit of the election, done by the people that the people chose from the former Trump administration to do the audit, has come back, and guess what? There was actually less votes for Trump than they thought, and more votes for Biden. Anyway, to coincide with the results of this count, there was going to be another protest in Washington, and there was a lot of back, channel chatter that was saying that was being driven by a lot of these right wing, I'm just going to say it, hate mongering, violence harboring douchebags who think they believe in America, and they were coming back, so they had to put the wall back up again. Right, because there was like a protest by these same people that did it. And I think that ultimately that sort of wall goes up, wall comes down, wall goes up, wall comes down will be reflective of how much neo-Nazi street protests we see. Like the less we see neo-Nazi street protests, the less we'll see the walls up around the Capitol. Now, the other point I wanted to make was a mutual friend of ours who's deceased, a man named Don Wheaties, who was kind of a brilliant, funny guy. He lived through the 60s and 70s and the Cultural Revolution in the United States.
Yeah, he was a good man.
And he and I used to sit, because we were roommates for a while. We used to sit and smoke weed and talk. And he talked to me about how every little advancement of what he called the safety Nazis eroded our freedoms a little bit. So this whole idea of what we went through after 9/11, where we had to take our shoes off, and right, like it's just this little slices of liberty that get taken away from us to compensate for this sense of fear, right?
Right.
And now we're 1 year into the resolution of the pandemic via vaccine, and there's still a lot of fear and anguish in people who are like, and in 2020, a lot of our rights and a lot of our movement and a lot of things got totally curtailed, and people rebelled, and people that I disagreed with rebelled, even though I agreed with the principles they were talking about. I agreed with the conclusions and the fear that was driving it, right? So it's really mixed bag to me. Like, yeah, there's a virus and we need to do this. And yeah, it's the wrong thing to do to like pretend that we can somehow all be safe as a result of curtailing our fears, because at a certain point it becomes worse than death.
Well, what was interesting with Spike's documentary to me is what I thought he did really well is he didn't say it. He just showed all these interviews and all these newsreel and media things from people's phones, et cetera. It was like, there really is a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard on the news last week that we had just surpassed the amount of deaths from COVID-19 had passed the Spanish flu of 1918.
Right.
And all along in the 20s, I was hearing like, well, that was a far worse situation because death was so instantaneous, et cetera, et cetera. And then I hear, well, now COVID-19 surpassed that. So there is a real pandemic. And yeah, you're right in the sense like our reaction, I guess that's kind of A Course in Miracles thing, is our thoughts and therefore our actions and reactions are creating our freedom or creating our hell.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. And it's so odd because if you try to break it down along the polarity that exists between what we'll call anti-vaxxers or COVID deniers or whatever you want to term you want to use, I actually think that there's some intelligence around the loss of freedoms in that discussion that those people present, but it gets motivated by this fear. Right. So on both sides, there's this fear thinking of, oh, we're all going to die from a pandemic, save us. And then the other side is the government's trying to control us and they're going to put robots in our bloodstream. And both things are motivating people from the opposite place that I would like to be motivated in my life. I want to come from a place of like serenity and love and courage, right? And I remember like feeling like it was a courageous act to go to Costco and stock up back in 2020. Like I donned all this stuff of gloves, and when I got back, I sprayed every box. We removed all of the right. I did this whole routine just to, deal with my fear and someone I live with fear
Oh
of
my
contracting
God.
the virus from touching a box,
It's so crazy. That
right?
sounds very Marin. I was going into Costco, the land of the unknown, to buy mass quantities of things. And there's someone in some fucking third world country going,
I'd
fuck, I'm
kill to
just
go to a
looking for a
Costco.
roof over my head.
I'd kill to have the money to go to a Costco right now.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
got cases of toilet paper? Fuck you.
Well, I think that's a kind of shempa on your part, really. You're just
Yeah.
like pooping all over my fear story.
Yep.
But I think it's worthwhile because it pokes fun at the whole idea of how relativist it all is, right? Like I'm worried about that, and then meanwhile, there's some people in South Africa and who like they can't shelter in place. They can't. There's no grocery stores to go to. It's the usual sort of horrific imbalance of resources that exists even more so now.
Is there music in the background?
Yeah, my meditation music is filling the house right now.
All right, groovy. What
Yeah,
a fucking hippie. Hey man, I just want us all to get along.
yeah. Watch out.
um,
I'm a hippie up to a point.
Guruji, be like water, my son. Um, so
Have you ever seen an
there's,
icicle?
yeah. What are you gonna do? Spit on me?
God, when are you gonna get over that?
Never. To my grave, Mark went to my grave.
Hey, I brought it up last week.
All right. See, when are you gonna get over that?
To my grave, Wilker, to my grave.
Touchy,
Doing
touchy.
the Shempa jazz.
Love it. Um, I have spoken with some very intelligent people who are not getting vaccinated, and I support their logic. It doesn't change my choice for myself. That it, just this morning in a work meeting, we have this online cloud-based platform for managing projects in a team environment. And someone was saying, how about if we all, and they were talking about the personal choices one can have for notifications. And I was like, why are we talking about that as a team thing? It's created for your own personal, like if you want messages, you get them. And if you don't, you turn them off. And I don't know, there seems to
What's your
be,
point?
I don't know, do I need one? That's my point. Do I need a point? My point is there's a lot of energy vying for everyone to do it this way, where it really doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, there's 6 ways to do everything, right? Or more.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm trying to relate that to what we were talking about before. Oh, I think you're about to say something about how you guys wanted to meet in person, and it was somehow there was a vaccine conversation that came up, but I don't know.
No, what I was saying
From
is,
that, from
well,
vaccine
okay,
to that.
so from that, like
Oh,
I've had,
personal choices. Now I get it.
right, exactly, right, that's it. Like, so that's the thing. It's like, you should get vaccinated. I think should, as soon, even when I say should, there's a red flag that goes off, and it's like, what the fuck's really going on here? Because should and must, those two words, I think, are like fucking weights around the ankle, you know.
Yeah, well, that's part of the lesson of our time. I You might not have seen the Facebook post I posted, I guess Wednesday, which had there's this old storyline from Star Trek movies where, um,
I did see that where you talked
yeah,
about the Spock and human, and
yeah, and the basic premise is that the good outweigh the many or the few. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one,
that's logic.
and that's logic,
But
right?
then the human thing is,
Well, right, and then in the next film, which they made us 3 years to wait, 3 years to hear this part, right? Was, well, Spock comes back, and there's this moment where he decides, well, we need to risk everybody to go save Chekhov, because that's the human thing to do, is to risk the needs of the everyone to save the one. And I think that perfectly encapsulates the dichotomy that people are facing in this thing. And what I noticed was a lot of the people that jumped on with likes, because I popped that down in the middle of someone who was saying they didn't want to be vaccinated,
right, right,
and
right.
I threw it down there without claiming one way or the other. And I noticed that I think people who read it and liked it because the first paragraphs about the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. But I don't think they read all the way through it to see that there's actually a whole another layer to it that's not as cut and dry as that.
Yeah,
And where we draw the line in this particular vaccination case, like a lot of people you could negotiate with and say, well, what if the person has debilitating health effects? You want to make them take a vaccine? And most people will go, yeah, you can't basically poison people if it's going to make them sick, right? And then they'll start to backtrack and talk about how, well, it doesn't make that many people sick, and that outweighs this, blah blah blah. But the thing is, the person's post we're talking about, he's not at risk for getting sick from the vaccine. And the idea that he thinks he is, or that he can exercise his freedom of choice because somehow the vaccine represents this problematic chemical. We're talking about someone who used to put all kinds of crazy fucking chemicals in his body for a long time for the temporary pleasure of getting high, right? And so the irony that he's staking out a position around this because of his freedom of choice, as if his body's going to be permanently damaged, just seems so what's the word I'm looking for, incongruous.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. We all agree, stop at a red light. We're not, I don't see anyone out on a corner going, it's my right to run through the red light. It's my choice. The government put that
well,
there.
the
I
car
don't.
metaphors get used a lot, except that you can choose not to drive.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that's the thing. That's ultimately what it is. It's a choice. You don't want to get vaccinated, don't get vaccinated. There's repercussions with our choices. And the truth is, we don't really know the repercussions of either choice deeply. And we do know there's a lot of misinformation out about, like the people who said, well, this thing was just pushed through in a couple months. I've seen interviews with this one woman who was one of them in the spike thing. And she says, we've been working on this for 40 years,
Yeah, they have
so
been, and that's one of the things that the anti-mRNA vaccine people say, is that every time they've done studies with that thing, they've, in animals, there's like these weird repercussions that happen, which why they haven't brought it forth until now. And the reality is, a whole lot of people got together and cashed in a lot of scientific research energy to up level the modeling, the digital modeling, the theoretical physics, and really do the work. Why did they do that? Because people were dying at an incredibly fast rate,
and
and we
that's
didn't know. And so, in the absence of knowing, you go for what you can, and then later, as you figure stuff out, you can sort of pull back. You can go, okay, like we realize
There's
this,
a
this, and this.
juxtaposition going on with what you're saying and the meditation music in the background.
Welcome to my life.
Whoever
I'm a living
determined,
Zen koan.
yeah, whoever determined the soundtrack choice to your diatribe is they're fired.
No, I did. I
You're
determined it.
fired. You're fired.
Okay,
Um,
Donald.
that's what I loved with Spike's documentary is, you see these fucking huge ice trailer trucks full of bodies,
Yeah.
so that's, he really let the image and people telling their own personal story speak. And then he put in a little bit of his own personal story and his wife. That had more to do with 9/11 though than I think the COVID thing.
Well, and there was a thing about how Brooklyn responded to Manhattan. It was really kind of a subtle part of that whole thing. But when you look at
Yeah,
every
Brooklyn.
person identifies who they are. Oh, so I'm so and so from Brooklyn,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Well, he did
And
that whole thing, Brooklyn strong, Brooklyn, or Brooklyn, Brooklyn. There was like that 30-second.
right, but this is one of the really super subtle subtexts of the whole four-part series, is that Brooklyn came to the rescue of Manhattan.
Yeah. Well, they jumped in. Yes, they did. Yes, they
Yeah.
did. Yeah.
Yeah, and Manhattan came to Manhattan's rescue. I'm not saying they were pansies or anything.
Right.
Not that there's anything wrong with being a flower, but um,
I'm sorry. I just choked on that. Just threw up into the back of my throat.
uh, I wished I could have pushed your mute button just as I was seeing you wind up to think through.
Yeah, you can't. What did you think of the 9/11 aspects of his documentary?
Did you say I can't?
I am Oz, the great and horrible.
For those of you who weren't watching, I muted Greg because I happened to be the Zoom originator on the call just to fuck with them. Again, in contrast to my beautiful meditation music. Here's me playing out 5-year-old shit with my friend.
Yep. Yep, that's what this is about. Moped Outlaws. 5-year-olds at what?
Without driver's licenses, loose on the road, without any protection.
Yeah. So what did you think about the 9/11 aspect, which really, like, it was the last episode that really concentrated on that?
Well, I think that it was an important thing to revisit in the 20th anniversary of the falling of the Twin Towers, the attack on the Pentagon, and well, the disintegration of Flight 97. Because what happened after that drove a lot of what's causing some of the blowback and fear that we're having now, the security issues. Because, the doctrine of surveillance was restored. There was all kinds of stuff right before then. We were dismantling parts of the military. Lots of military contractors were going to be losing their budgets. There was a massive uptick in military spending at that point, and then a massive intrusion into the privacy of people's lives. And you have to actually spend a lot of time and energy to find out just how deep that goes, and the kind of crap that was going on with AT&T and how they were tapping everybody's phone and collecting it all into a giant database. Literally every call that you've been on since 2001 has gone into a massive storage device there with an AI that keyword searches for stuff in the conversation. Keyword searches for accents from different cultures, different languages. Now, I read a lot about that. And at first I was really worried, like, oh shit. And then I'm like, well, yeah, I don't like it. I think it's wrong. It's not what we stand for. And then I realized, like, okay, There are so many calls being made on any given hour of any given day that it's actually literally impossible for them to sift through all of it to find my little story about wanting to, talk dirty to my girlfriend, or like tell my friend about the pimple on my ass, or whatever the fucking thing is that I would be embarrassed about having the government listen to my conversations. And I was like, yeah, that's part of the problem, is that, the surveillance state claims all this stuff. And then the reality is they can't actually stop it. They can't actually figure this stuff out, even though they use these things to justify it. Now, the third layer is, well, there's probably security officials that would say, well, we can't tell you about the times that we heard about stuff that we were able to stop it, right? And it's just the rabbit hole, right? That term itself wasn't really as used until 9/11, right? Going down the rabbit hole. I
Right.
mean, you had to be into the Kennedy assassination to be a conspiracy theorist before that. What do I think? I think there's literally is an economic dumbing down of the fourth estate. Less and less we get deep news analysis with pros and cons and debate in it. And more we get every freaking news station saying the same 30-second soundbite. And
That's
everybody's trying to find the most potent soundbite that will get everybody to clickbait on it. Right. And
yeah.
at just that, the whole culture's intellectual capacity and critical thinking skills and analyzing the political context in which we live, or the social context in which we live, is being minimized and shrunken and shrunken and shrunken. And that's a tragedy.
Well, Jon Stewart, when he had his Daily Show, this
Mm-hmm.
is what, 15 years ago. I remember he did a bit on talking points. And it was around the election time. And he just showed newscast after newscast verbatim saying the exact thing. I was like, well, fuck it. When I see that, I'm like, just throw it all out. Because yeah, there there is there is a lot of chaos going on in society and with politics and media. So it's almost like that statement, I just was listening to an old Jay-Z song today. He said he heard from an old person, don't argue with an idiot because from a distance, no one can tell the difference.
Which one's the idiot? You mean?
Right, exactly. They
Yeah.
both look like idiots. So, so there's this element of, like with something so obvious, just walk away. Because me attempting anything with it is I'm as foolish as the foolish chaos I'm attempting to, I don't know, heal, right? What? I don't
Well,
know.
I think there's something to what you're saying in terms of oppositional argumentation. And I found in my own practice that when I actually am able to create connection and empathy, what happens in what seems to be a polarized opposing conversation is that the positions soften. And once someone feels more heard, they're more willing to discuss the more subtle nuances and implications. And so, if you go hard at someone's premise as if to debase it and therefore debase their ego because they're identified with their opinion,
Right.
then that's what you get. You get more resistance and more hardness and more debasement. But if you acquiesce and soften and then recognize, hey, I hear how that feels for you, and then ask them a question that's in alignment with your point of view, but opens them up to the human experience as they might also share it, they often will shift, and it'll seem contradictory to their egoic, uh, our egoic persona. And that's the other thing. We've got this kind of ego about who we are because now we're all social stars. We're all media stars now, right? We all have our Facebook pages and we have our social media, and it's like that's another part of it, is we're all protecting our ego so much in order to be right. And I learned a few years ago that I'd rather be connected than be right.
Well, yes. That's one of the profound statements a lot of people pull from Course in Miracles. Would you rather be happy or right?
Yeah.
Um, The other day in meditation, I was meditating on my connection, my attachment to my breath, and how my breathing, I was sensing I was an integral part of who I think I am. Like like Greg Wilker's breathing, and there's a like locked attachment to that. And my thought with that was like, that's going to create a lot of trouble when it's time for me to die.
Maybe
Well,
if you're awake.
if I'm fighting for that breath,
Well, you have to be conscious to have that struggle.
oh, is there something you know that I don't know? Is there something you want to share with me, Mr. Went?
Sure.
Just don't look behind you, Greg.
If you are um, not able to reason with that part of your brain that would want to think about whether you're breathing or not, then when you stop breathing, you won't be able to there won't be that struggle because you won't have that mental activity.
Are you talking about the benefits of morphine?
Well, that's one way to look at it. Another is if you just got knocked out in the head, if you just get bonked on the head and you're not there to think about the fact that you can't breathe.
That just made me think of the jumpers of 9/11.
Oh God. Yeah.
That description that of what was left.
Well, and the really horrific choice of do I want to die of smoke inhalation or do I want to jump out or fire or jump out the window?
Yeah.
Like this looks like the choice I have. And
How much
on
of a
one level,
choice?
I would like to argue that there's a third choice. Well, why don't I just hang on to the outside of the building for a while? And then, of course, the building falls. So that wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah. Whew. I hope I never have that choice in my lifetime.
I hope so too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh yeah. Wow. Well, I get the connection between meditation and the rehearsal for crossing the threshold. Like there's something there to expand upon. Like anyone who's listening to this call who wants to get really super serious, that's a really great thing to contemplate when you're meditating is, letting go, surrendering at the level of allowing yourself not to suffer in the moment of passing. And it sounds really noble and interesting and groovy to practice. And I'll just be honest, one of the things that I do in my qigong practice every day is called sealing the cauldron.
Yeah, you talked about this last week.
Yeah, so I can't hold my breath for very long.
Well, do you practice to hold it a little longer each time?
Well, I'm told not that that's performative and that that's not the point, but the awareness is the point.
The awareness of that border of survival.
Well, can you let go when the mind says, I need to stop holding my breath and just let the body dictate?
Can you do that?
I don't know. That's why I experiment every day.
Every day, every day, every
What I
day.
know that this, like back to my whole nightmare scenario that we talked about at the beginning of the call, what I noticed in the last 2 weeks, which is not, it does not feel good, is I'm I'm having this panic right when I'm about to fall asleep.
Hmm,
Like I'm not going to be able to breathe.
really? That's wild.
And it's weird. It's like just that moment when you're like going to drift away to sleep and it's supposed to be super cool, chill, right? And
Yeah.
I'm getting this like hit of adrenaline and being
Wake
like,
up.
"Oh fuck."
That's a fucked up way to go to sleep. Do you think there's any
Really,
merit to you doing that sleep apathy? What, not apathy, sleep
yes, I have
apathy.
sleep apathy. I don't care if I sleep.
Yeah, it seems like it. So what is it? What is it called?
I have sleep apnea.
Apnea. Yeah. Do you think there's any merit to you doing that test and see if that's happening?
Oh, I have sleep apnea,
Oh, you know you do? You've
I have
slept.
I have a device that I use to help compensate for
Oh,
it.
really?
Yeah, and that's what's so weird about it.
That is weird.
But I sort of decoded it because I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, a really amazing um, physician and Dr. Michelle Veneziano. She's I forget what they call them,
Osteopathic.
osteopathic, but she's also
Hot.
multiphasic. Well, yeah, she is hot. That's true. But she was talking about how nasal breathing is the path to healing a lot of different nervous system things.
Mhm.
And that being able to sleep and breathe through your nose is like a next level capacity. And so I've been practicing sleep or breathing through my nose when I'm sleeping as much as I can. But I know that there's a moment when I go unconscious that I return immediately to mouth breathing. And I think that's what's happening. I think that moment where I transition from nose breathing to mouth breathing, my body has this moment where it doesn't know what to do.
Have you
And
practiced nose breathing while exercising?
I think so.
You don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but
I
I
mean, like
have.
you only breathe through your nose
Yeah,
while
when I ride my bike and
vigorous,
when I do my qigong and all those things,
right?
yeah, when I'm
All right.
weightlifting.
So
Yeah.
I think that's helping to create a habit of nose breathing.
Oh, yeah, I definitely made huge progress in that area and I value it,
All right.
right? But there's this moment where my body, like, I go unconscious and my mouth opens, and that's how I breathe when I'm asleep. And I can tape my mouth shut. I've heard there's that story, but it feels really claustrophobic, right? And back, like, since my health is part of what we're talking about, one of the weird things I noticed, because my CPAP gives me a reading about how many times I have episodes where I stop breathing at night. And I've noticed that on nights when I eat ice cream, I have 0 episodes,
Really?
which is fucked up
That
because I
is
know that it
wow.
can't be that great for me to have sugar and dairy. Like, I hardly ever eat dairy. I'm into my oat milk and all that stuff. And,
Well, they have oat milk, ice cream.
yeah, I'm sure it's the sugar or whatever. But it seems so weird to me. Like, you would think that the thing that would disrupt me would be, but I think the sugar crash
Just
sends me
makes
into a deeper level of sleep. And I think this is related to my years of marijuana use because I would get high every day. And so I would basically pass out at night from being stoned, right? And often that was really, like, I had weed and sugar in my body. And that blood sugar drop sends you into a deep hole. It's great.
I
I don't know
wonder.
what it cost me. I mean, you
Well, see,
what?
now we're going back to that element that we talked about earlier about,
Hmm.
so it could be that decades of a habit created some biological programming
Hmm.
that's going to take a while to unprogram,
If ever,
if ever, right?
right? So what I have is I have choice. And my choice is to not go back to um, mouth breathing unless I'm unconscious and don't know what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and to not eat sugar and dairy before bed and not smoke weed.
And I think what that brings me to is I am excited about the choice of the unknown, because what you're talking about, that's where I go to. Like I know what I did, and well, how about with this next step? Like, I have no fucking idea. Let's
Right.
find out. Let's see what's in this dark, unaware area.
Yeah. That's what I love about pioneers in consciousness. Like, there's this layer of it where we think sociologically, like, well, oh, it starts with weed, psilocybin acid, and then you get to a point where you're like, well, what's possible without any of that? And you start talking to people that have do these breath practices like diaphragmatic breathing and various other psychedelic breath practices, and it's a whole other world, you know.
Yeah, the whole other world part for me is kind of like a candy store. It's like, that's not where I want my purpose to be. Like, I was just thinking, like, there's been a few meditation teachers that I've heard talk about, transplanetary traveling
Mm.
mentally. And I was like, I've never experienced anything like that. I was like, that's not what I'm really going for. Like, honestly, let's use a few trigger words here. God, that's what I'm going for. An experience and knowing God, that realm of infinite love, joy, hope, peace, love. There's a fifth one I always forget. Faith.
Careful which finger you use.
Fuck you, Jesus. No, all right, I take that back.
Ecstasy, joy, love, peace. Why
Joy
not
and ecstasy
ecstasy?
are kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, but that is what I'm wanting to connect with. And I have faith that it is real and that there is an ability to connect in such a manner that that's one's experience 24/7.
Yeah. Um, I hear that. Like there's a way to get out from under the delusions of the ego into a place where you recognize life for a different aspect other than right. And I think that's personally why I've always been so curious about all the different esoteric studies and various things is like, people are looking for answers. I don't know if I'm looking for answers so much as I have this belief that there's a way of being that feels good,
Mhm,
that isn't what you normally mean by pleasure seeking,
mhm.
right? And there's the capacity to receive and accept and have, stress or suffering in that context and not have it not mean being happy, like being right.
Yeah, I was reflecting on what you shared last week about the gentleman who doesn't use any Novocaine or gas when he's at the dentist. And I've heard that from a few men. And I thought, well, that's a really neat macho thing. And I can appreciate that. But how are you with the unknown, with the empathetic aspects of emotion? And how do you do with the feminine energies of empathy and serene gentleness? Like,
Well, I can tell you without revealing this person's identity that they don't do well in male female relationships for very long. They like to go to the bar. Um,
so there's an element of like, okay, that's neato. You got that one down. Why don't you pick one of these other things that you're fucking struggling with?
are you shooting on him? Are you giving him a
Yeah,
should?
yeah, fuck yeah, I am. Like you want it, like it's almost like that fucking Eddie Murphy joke about um oh come on, songs in the key of life, Stevie Wonder. You
right.
know, so oh yeah, you want to fucking impress me? Take the steering wheel. You know, like yeah, you want to yeah, okay, that's really neato at the dentist. You want to impress me? Do something you're fucking uncomfortable with. All right, that'll impress me.
Well, I'll tell you offline about what that actually looks like for him because if I did it right now, it would be the
Out in the
triangulation. Everyone would know who I'm talking about. And I
we're
think
not gonna out this gentleman. Jerry Smith, you're safe with that. Oops!
it's just about integrity. You know,
Yes, I
we don't have
understand.
permission to talk about him like this.
We
So
don't
it's,
need his permission. No, I'm just joking.
I
Don't,
love
don't.
that. I love that about you. I think that's another way of dropping the ego. Like, why couldn't, what's this idea that I can't talk
Who are
about it?
we protecting? Exactly.
Right.
Who are we protecting? That's
We're, I'm protecting my own ego that doesn't want to have to look at this guy in the face and feel bad about having talked about him behind his back.
about shit. All right, let's. The recording is stopped.